the technology has evolved to a greater heights in modern day context. However, we can't replace a full operation we can't replace a human being by technology. One of the key reasons why we can't do this is humans tend to make or build relationships. In today's business context, the relationships matter a lot in the success of a business. Further, supplier-buyer relationship is one of the key relationships in a supply chain. So in today's context, we say businesses or brands do not compete, but their supply chains do. So ladies and gentlemen, today my objective of this presentation is to present to you a study done on the antecedents as key enablers for a supplier-buyer relationship. Now, if you look at the background of supply chains, from very beginning, traditional, isolated, transactional supply chains to it has evolved to an integrated, collaborative, synchronized supply chains. So in the backdrop of these collaborative supply chains, supplier-buyer relationships are very important as a key business partner of a business. So if you look at the supplier-buyer relationships, which dates back to history, we can bring in examples from our own country, Sri Lanka, where in Mahavansa it stated that ancient Sri Lanka had relationships with Rome. So being both countries representing as suppliers and buyers, there is evidence. So in addition, the recent empirical studies done argue that supplier-buyer relationship should be at optimum levels to create competitive advantages to a modern supply chain. Further, if you take these examples from the industry, specifically in FMC industry, giants like Unilever, Nestle, P&G are driving strategic programs to drive supplier-buyer relationships because they know the importance of it. So the objective of this study was to synthesize the theories underlying supplier-buyer relationships to identify most common antecedents of supplier-buyer relationships and to develop a conceptual framework for future research. The methodology which we followed in this paper is the systematic literature, which I will not go into detail. And straight away, if we go to the literature review, most of the scholars have identified that concludes organizations that do not perceive the need for a supply relationship management, those organizations will have an issue in addressing the modern day challenges of supply chains. So in 2018, Zhang and Sayo argue supplier relationship management has become a vital diet in the modern, dynamic, inherent global supply chain environment. Now, coming into the theoretical paradigms of trying to explain this phenomena of supplier-buyer relationship, social exchange theory is one of the theories that provides an argument that the rewards related to an interaction or a relationship are determined by the benefits and the cost of that relationship. And also, theory explains that the interaction of the exchange partners depend on the interdependence and the contract of relationship with its type. So we can partially, to a certain extent, try to explain the phenomena by using social exchange theory. In addition, resource-based view describes how a firm leverages its firm-specific resources, capabilities, which are based on the company's internal strength and shortcomings to achieve a sustainable long-term competitive advantage. And many scholars argue that firms should use these internal resources and capabilities to help the firm to obtain external resources and build up relationships. And on the contrary, Levy in 2006 identified and verified and examined that the limits of resource-based weave explaining a competitive advantage in a networked context. So another theory that we can use or try to explain this phenomenon is the transaction cost economics theory, where it says it looks at the transaction and the costs involved and try to minimize the cost involved in transaction. So even in a relationship, since there is an element of transaction embedded into a relationship, we can look at a relationship in that TCE lens. So these theories can be used to explain to a certain extent the supplier-buyer relationship of a firm. So the next is to identify the antecedents of this supplier-buyer relationship. So Draft and Lengel in 1986 defined communications as meaningful and timely information sharing between firms, formally and informally. Further, they concluded that communication is significant in terms of reducing uncertainty and maintaining good relationships. So therefore, there is a significance in communication to a supplier-buyer relationship. And also, Katzner and Oliveira in 2020 defined cooperation as the joint pursuit of agreed on goals corresponding to a shared understanding about contributions and payoffs. And many researchers argue encouragement of cooperation is essential to have a good relationship. And also on the other side, researchers argue in absence of cooperation, it can cause litigation, various issues and adverse impacts on a supplier-buyer relationship. Hence, cooperation is also an important enabler for supplier-buyer relationship. And Agrawal and Narayan in 2020 defined commitment is considered as a state of mind of one partner with another individual or another party. And in the recent literature, along with Bianchi and Saleh in 2020, many concluded that long-term relationships link up with strong commitments. And coming into the last antecedent that we came across is the trust. So trust is an obligation where there is a between two parties to act upon irrespective of the contingencies that come across. So several studies have identified that trust is also quite a significant enabler for collaboration and therefore supplier-buyer relationships. And then finally, then there is a model that a conceptual framework that we came across combining all these four factors where that I call it a 3CT model where communication, cooperation, and commitment are 3 C's and T is the trust, so that we can have an idea or a conceptual framework how to build supplier-buyer relationship. So in conclusion, in addition to identifying these four as key enablers or antecedents of supplier-buyer relationship, I would suggest that it is worthwhile exploring the role of supplier-buyer relationship on business performance of a buying firm, so that we can explore further the impacts of a good supplier-buyer relationship on a business performance of a firm. Thank you very much.